Thank you for having me here. So as mentioned, I really like healthcare outcomes and next generation sequencing, and this is the focus of our project. It's evaluating healthcare utilization and outcomes in cancer patients in Ontario, post NGS. I have zero disclosures given I'm still a fellow, which is good. So as you all know, in medical oncology, there's a lot of shift towards precision medicine and towards next generation sequencing. I'll do a brief introduction, try to convince you why it's important, the project that we're doing. It's a very old picture where we started wondering in medical oncology why patients of the same diagnosis who receive the same treatment, some patients have a positive effect, some patients do not, and some have toxic effects, and some patients do not. And the way medicine is shifting in oncology is that there's no more one-size-fits-all medicine, as we all know, and it's going more and more into precision medicine. And the logic behind it is if we have both patients A and B with the same tumor, each one has a different mutation. If we give a drug that is targeted for each mutation, patients should do better. That's what we think. We see it sometimes in the early stage clinical trials. So that's the logic behind doing NGS testing. One famous example of NGS testing is Foundation Medicine that's developed by Roche. An example just to give you an idea how it is reported. So this is a real patient. They got tested. It gives us the tumor type, lists all the genetic alterations that have been identified. And at the same time, it tells us how many genomic findings they found, how many clinical trials are activated. So it actually lists for us. For example, this patient had a KRAS mutation and said there is an FDA-approved drug, however, not for this type of cancer, but it kind of helps us move forward and to try to find some clinical trials for those patients. Now, everything is related to money. How do we know that next generation sequencing is important? Is because the stock market goes up. I like to follow stock markets of every single NGS. To give you an idea, once they started reporting that NGS is important for Roche, look what happened to their stock market. Skyrocketed upward in one single day, which is almost unheard of. And this is with their publications. It's becoming standard of care. This is when the FDA said, we're going to adopt it and let's go ahead. And that's what happened. So money drives everything. And for that, we have to do some studies in order to see if they're actually valuable or not. So why do we do it as medical oncologists? Is to provide better cancer care. This is a patient that I had in Montreal. She's a 64-year-old woman, stage 4 cholangiocarcinoma. She failed the conventional treatments, and since the beginning of her treatment, she said, I want everything, do everything possible. So I told her, well, there's Foundation One Medicine. We can send your tumor. We can see if there's something positive there. And she had a BRAF positive mutation. So we told her, let's try the conventional treatments. When we start seeing the conventional treatments failing, how about we put you on some kind of a clinical trial? The only clinical trial for her actually was in Boston, and she was willing to fly over there every 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, for 3 days. And that's what she was doing. She goes there, she gets the scan, the blood test, gets the pills, comes back to Montreal, and gets treated. If we follow the guidelines for cholangiocarcinoma stage 4, the overall survival is median is between 6 and 9 months. She lived 31 months. And that's her tumor before the BRAF, which is on your left side, and that's post right-hand side. And as we can see, there is a mouse. So those tumors really all went away after 2 months, and she was living an excellent quality of life. So the question is, it could be a fluke, one patient. We don't really know the key challenges and also the opportunities of next generation sequencing. So if you look in the literature, there's not a lot of publications on how valuable those tests are nationwide or province-wide. So it's becoming very challenging in order to understand the value of those next generation sequencing. It's very hard to do some analysis and some studies. That's complicated as I like metro stations. So this is Tokyo's metro station. It's that complicated. And hopefully by today's lecture, I'm just going to tone it down a bit. This is Montreal, simpler. And the easiest one I've seen is Toronto. That is the easiest subway station I've ever seen in my life. So hopefully today you're going to see how we can address those challenges. So if you look at the literature, there's been a spike in publications about healthcare outcomes using next generation sequencing. They're trying to understand how we can take precision medicine and integrate it into the healthcare system. And so the challenges arise. Is it privately funded, publicly funded, Canada, USA? Who's going to take charge of that? When there's the meetings, for example, ASCO, ESMO, the GI conferences, they try to meet in order to do some kind of guidelines on when should we use NGS. And so far, there's never been a standard guideline that says for this kind of patient, this is when you should do the NGS. So it has never been established. And to who do we do those tests? There's no policies in place. There was one policy that they tried doing between Japan and Europe. They sat down as ministries, actually, and different ministries from different countries. And they realized we cannot have a policy because each country is different. The payers are different. The tumor types are also different. So there's really a very hard challenge in order to do a test or a study. All the studies that were reported were retrospective studies, and they were very poorly made because there has never been a hub of data where they can go in and tap. So the biggest one that I saw was approximately 450 patients where they tried to look at their next generation sequencing and try to do some kind of healthcare outcome analysis. So our proposed study, it's evaluating the healthcare utilization in Ontario, and that's using the Octane study. The uniqueness, I was like, try first the uniqueness, is the value of NGS has not been described. And the ability to analyze NGS using administrative data sets is important, especially for policymakers and governments. And we can actually address those. Everything that I mentioned can be addressed with our study. And our research question can actually answer national and also international importance because nobody still reported outcomes. So the aim, our first aim, is to link the next generation sequencing databases that we have. So right now, the active one is Octane, and before Octane, there were the Impact/Compact. I'll show you the number of patients. The first thing is to link the databases using the OHIP number of the patients to an administrative data source. And the administrative data source is called ICIS, IC/ES, not ISIS. So I'll tell you a bit about it in a bit. Its first thing is to link those two together. After that, it's just to try to evaluate the value of next generation testing and try to understand what did the patients get in terms of treatments, how many times they went to the ER, what was their survival, did they get any special kinds of treatments, any clinical trials that they went on, how much did they survive with and without. So we're gonna have a matching cohort. And then to compare the healthcare utilizations and try to assess the cost, which is the most challenging part. The study design, who knows ICIS? Fabulous. So if I'm saying something wrong, you can correct me. So ICES, and I'm Lebanese, so I could imagine on WhatsApp, I was trying to say ISIS all the time, and I had a feeling somebody was hearing me on the other line. So I don't say ISIS anymore, I say ICES. So ISIS is, it's an independent, secure system where they take all the medical information, not all of them, but a lot of medical information on every single patient with an OHIP number inside Ontario. Blood tests, emergency visits, what were the diagnoses, pathologies, chemotherapy treatments, medications. It's not a perfect system, but it is a system that is available in all of the province. And the beauty is that the Octane is a huge NGS study that also covers all of the province. So we are really uniquely based that we have a huge next generation sequencing platform, and we have a huge administrative data set that's available. And if we just make them talk to each other, we're going to have a massive study on our hand, and our power will be high. The only way to connect those two is through the OHIP number, and we already did the connection, and I'm filtering through the data as we speak. And the RB already approved the study. So that's IC/ES as an advertisement slide. So very secure, very challenging. The only way we can access it is using a special person. They have to manually go there, tap in the data. So I cannot go physically myself. And you need a statistician. It's very labor intensive and costly. So they charge based on whatever you need. The biggest challenge was actually doing a contract with them, given that we are pushing information into their system. And these are the Impact, Compact, and Octane patients as of 3 months ago. So we truly have a huge power. As I mentioned, the biggest study that I've seen was approximately 400 patients. We sequenced 3,601. So we already have a huge power to start with. Understandably that we do know as we're trying to subset those patients, we're going to lose some of that power, but still it's a huge number. Even if it's a descriptive type of study, it's still interesting to know what happened to those 3,600 patients. Because there's two thoughts. Some people think that NGS testing is a waste of time. Patients will have a shorter overall survival because we make them wait before we try something else. And there's another group of people that believe that if we do next generation sequencing and we find a signature, patients can actually benefit from that. And the beauty of it is that they're really the only provincial initiatives across the province that were done. So this is our study. Step number 1 is to get all the data from IMPACT, COMPACT, and the Octane data and lump them into one cohort. Step number 2 is to make ICS communicate with our cohort. The easiest way we found is to actually send all of our information into ICS, and they can do the linkage using the OHIP. And then we passed through a safety mechanism where we made sure actually that the OHIPs were really linking to each other and we're not doing mistakes between patients. Next, we obtained all of the hospital procedures and diagnosis. What we're trying to look for is if they go more to the emergency room versus patients that do not get the next generation sequencing test in order to evaluate our healthcare utilization. We're taking their vital status. We don't have ECOG on them, but we do have a performance status on those patients inside ICS and emergency department visits. We take also the cancer registry and treatment data in order to see, have those patients, did they go on a certain clinical trial or a certain experimental medications or not, or they just went through the regular route of a 3rd or 4th line standard treatment. And we're trying to do the cost data and healthcare utilization. As we were doing this study, one question that I had is, because of the huge number and the complexity, one question that we had among the group was, how do physicians feel about next generation sequencing? What is their input? We don't know. And we already had 3,000 patients surveyed. On Octane, it was 1,000 at the time. So my question was, as a subset study, what do physicians think about it? As we're doing this study, it's important to get the information, the real data, but it's also nice to see the input of the physicians and what they think. Why do I say that? It's because there was one big paper. It was very well done, but extremely labor intensive on the medical oncologists because the survey was 19 pages. They sent the survey to 1,281 oncologists, and they waited for the oncologists to mail back the survey. And all they asked them was, what do you think about next generation sequencing? Have you tested it? What happened to your patients? Just as a descriptive method, just to see their input. And physicians mentioned that the reason why they test it is to guide treatment decisions, and approximately 34%, 29% just to get a patient to a clinical trial to see if they are eligible or not. And what they noticed, which is very interesting, is that physicians with certain demographics, certain age group, certain locations in the US tend to really order next generation testing on almost every single patient. So for example, tertiary care centers, they tend to order more. Physicians who have more than 25-year experience, especially in early stage clinical trials, tend to order more than regular physicians who are working in a community. And it's not a proof, but they felt that it is often useful in 26.8% of the cases. Our first step that we did was doing a retrospective study. So it's still active. And what I did is I created a survey and I sent it to all the physicians across PMH that actually ordered Octane on their patients. And my question for them is, why did you order it? And based on the result, which I attached the result of Octane, what did you do with that test? We had a feeling that there would be less than 8 to 9% of patients who actually got treated based on the data that's available in the literature. But we were surprised, and it's not a big cohort, it's 110 surveys, but hopefully we're going to have 200 by the end of September. But out of 110 surveys, 18% got treated. Some of them on phase 1 clinical trials, some of them on approved medications. And 82% did not get treated. Half is because there was no mutation, and 18% because the patient was not suitable. The reason why not suitable is they order the next generation sequencing most of the times, and then by the time the result is out, they come, they see the patient, the performance status deteriorated, and they cannot put them on a clinical trial. They become ineligible.
What percentage of patients had a mutation but not a drug to treat it?
Almost 25%. You mean targeted ones that there is actually in the literature some kind of medication? Yeah, that's a number. And we have the biggest phase 1 group, so it's unfortunate for those patients that they sit and wait. That led to more surveys, and the question was here, what do patients think and what do physicians think? Retrospective is great, prospective is better. So one study that we're doing with Roche is we want the patients, once the physician sees the patient and says, I think this patient should do a next generation sequencing test. The patient fills a decisional conflict scale form. I'll show you this form. It's basically after the doctor explains to the patient, this is why I'm doing the test, the survey targets the patient in order to see how does the patient feel about the test. Are they comfortable or not? Did they understand why the test is being done or not? It's a very well-validated tool, and they did this for Oncotype DX in Ontario. It was a publication 3 years ago where they surveyed the patients before and after Oncotype. So it just took the same design of the study and trying to do it for NGS testing. And the staff also fills a survey pre. So before the test is done, the staff will tell us, why am I doing it? And am I comfortable with the results to explain it to the patients? And we're also obtaining demographics about those physicians. Then the test is sent. And once the test is reported, the patient will fill a decisional conflict scale post, and that's after the doctor explains the result, to see if the patient actually understands the value of the result that they obtained. So now we can see if the patient feels more comfortable or not after the result came out. And also we will see how the staff thinks about the result that they have at hand. Are they comfortable taking that result that they have and move forward with a treatment or no treatment, depending on the result? And then after a couple of months, we will do a final feedback of those physicians to see what do they think about the next generation sequencing test that they ordered. So this is the feedback on the genomic analysis. So we'll see if it is important for them to provide diagnostic information or prognostic information or to guide treatments, or are they just using it on patients who have rare cancers? And the decisional conflict scale is also for the patients, and it's just a method to see how they feel about the test and they're comfortable with the test. The reason why is when they did the test for the Oncotype DX, the DCS for the Oncotype DX, they saw that patients were very conflicted at the beginning. And once the result of the Oncotype DX came out and the physician sat with the patient and told them, this is what needs to be done, they felt more comfortable with the decision moving forward. Next generation sequencing has a lot of conflicting results because we can go in the room and tell them, you have 25 mutations. And then they will be like, yes, I have mutations. But when they were like, but there are no treatments right now. So we don't know how the patients feel about it too. What is their intake? Is it upsetting for them to know that there's mutations and there's nothing that can be done? Or is it good that they know that they have mutations, maybe in the future, a lingering hope? So we don't know. And the DCS will give us an idea about that. And that's about it. Questions? Thank you.